Good evening and good afternoon and welcome to Qnews. Before we start with our bulletin, let's go live from Beirut. Pope Leo XIV has already arrived for a 3-day visit. He's expected to appeal for peace in a country that is continued targeted by the Israeli airstrikes on the second and final leg of his first overseas trip as leader of the Catholic Church. Right, that was live from Beirut, a high-level reception for the Pope of the Vatican, Pope Leo XIV, who came to Lebanon appealing for peace to prevail, appealing for a wish of the nations of the Middle East and the whole world for peace and prosperity, for nations to prosper, an appeal that was very much appreciated by Lebanon. As we are seeing here, the Pope was received by the President of Lebanon, Joseph Aoun, and First Lady, of course. And as we see, high-level dignitaries were receiving the Pope, appreciating so much his 3-day visit to Lebanon, the last leg in which he chose Lebanon to make this appeal. Right, back to our bulletin, and now we move on to the latest developments in Gaza. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has sent a message to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas for the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, reaffirming Egypt's unwavering support for Palestine. President Sisi praised the legendary resilience of Palestinians amid ongoing hardships in Gaza, the West Bank and Jerusalem, highlighting daily restrictions, land sieges and settler attacks. He called on the international community to assist in reconstruction efforts and support the Palestinian Authority in providing essential services. The president reiterated Egypt's commitment to Palestine's independent statehood along the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdullah from Gaza, the formation of a local government by Gazans, and the start of reconstruction under the second phase of the US peace plan. Abdulati met his Pakistani counterpart Shah Mahmoud Qureshi in Islamabad on Sunday, highlighting the need for an international stabilization force to secure the ceasefire and preparations for an international conference on Gaza's early recovery and rebuilding. Egypt also reaffirmed the importance of its historic bilateral ties with Pakistan and stressed activating institutional dialogue frameworks, including the joint committee co-chaired by both foreign ministers to achieve tangible benefits for both countries. Pakistan's Defense Minister Khawaja Asif has criticized Israel for continuing attacks in Gaza despite an October ceasefire, warning that Muslim countries backing the deal may need to reassess their stance. In a post on X, Asif called the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement one-sided and accused Israel of violating the truce and killing Palestinians, including children. He said ongoing Israeli actions raised doubts about the deal's implementation and noted that countries like Turkey, Egypt and Qatar may need to reconsider the support. Asif cited Amnesty International, which said Israel's genocide is not over, and urged Western governments to pressure Israel to comply with the international law. Arab League Secretary General Ahmed Abul Ghait affirmed that the Palestinian National Project remains strong with firm Arab and international support. Speaking on the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, he condemned Israel's attacks in Gaza and the West Bank, calling them attempts to erase Palestinian society. He stressed that decades of struggle have not ended the push for an independent state now recognized by 157 countries. Bulletin urged full implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 2803, calling for Israel's withdrawal, unhindered aid and reconstruction to support Palestinian resilience. Israeli media has reported that Israel is planning a new Gaza under military control starting in Rafah. The initiative, still in the planning phase, would include caravan-style housing with water, electricity and sewage infrastructure where Palestinians would be invited to relocate. The plan envisions the Israeli army operating facial recognition systems and metal detectors along key areas referred to as the Yellow Line. Similar zones could later be established in Khan Yunis and northern Gaza as part of broader efforts to stabilize the region, according to the report. Israeli occupation forces have continued to close the entrances to the towns of Deir Balut, Rafat, Al-Zawaya, Al-Mas'a in Salfit province since Friday night. The closures have intensified military restrictions in the area, severely disrupting Palestinian movement and limiting access to workplaces, schools and public services. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has formally requested a presidential pardon in his long-running corruption case, saying the ongoing trial is undermining national cohesion and his ability to govern. Netanyahu said the decision was driven by Israel's security and political reality, despite his belief he would ultimately be fully acquitted. He argued that ending the proceedings would help ease internal tensions and enable broader national unity. Netanyahu's lawyers submitted the requests earlier on Sunday, asserting the Prime Minister still maintains complete confidence in his innocence. The Likud leader urged political actors to support the move, saying it serves the good of the country. Israel's opposition leader Yair Lapid has called on President Isaac Herzog not to pardon Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu unless he admits guilt, shows remorse and retires from politics. Lapid's statement came after Netanyahu requested a pardon in his ongoing corruption trial, claiming legal proceedings hinder his ability to govern. Netanyahu, Israel's long-serving Prime Minister, denies bribery, fraud and breach of trust charges. Israel's far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has urged an end to the questioning of soldiers involved in shootings of Palestinians. Ben-Gvir reportedly visited the border police unit responsible for the killings of 2 Palestinians in Jenin, telling the commander he would be promoted the day after the incident. Meanwhile, Israeli media report unease within the security establishment over the Trump administration's proposed Gaza plan, with assessments suggesting it is unlikely to dismantle Hamas. Well, for more analysis, we now move to Salma Al-Fiqhi in our newsroom.
Thank you, Mona. And for further analysis, we are joined from Cairo by the El Ahram Managing Editor, Mr. Mohammed Izzeddin. Welcome to Q News, sir. Sir, what are the potential consequences of Israel's reported plan to establish a new Gaza under the military control for Palestinian civilians and regional stability?
Thank you for having me here on Q News. Of course, the consequences are catastrophic because of this plan that Israel is trying to do to manipulate Sharm el-Sheikh's agreement and Trump's peace plan. And they are trying to actually stole the main point of the agreement that asked them to withdraw from the Gaza Strip. And so first they started with the yellow lines, and now there are the so-called red lines, and they're talking about full-on areas under their full control, not just administrative control, but also military control of these areas under the pretext of security. And so this here is a grave violation of the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement, and it shows that Israel is stalling greatly here, so that we don't move to phase 2 of the agreement. And also they are trying to manipulate even the stabilization forces, and they are trying to have the forces in the Gaza Strip under their control or in direct contact with Israel, on the contrary of the agreement of what they agreed on withdrawing from the Gaza Strip. And so it is a new attempt from the Israeli side to stall and hinder Trump's peace plan in the Gaza Strip, and in efforts to satisfy the extremist officials under the pretext of having administrative control in Gaza.
Okay, Mr. Azzedine, how could Netanyahu's request for a presidential pardon maybe influence the public trust in the Israeli institutions and the perception of corruption in governance?
Of course, it is a desperate step here, and Netanyahu asked for this because he knows that he will be held accountable in at least 2 of the 3 crimes that he is accused of. And so he's been preparing for this since President Donald Trump's visit and his meeting in the Knesset, and talking publicly for the first time about the importance of a pardon for Netanyahu. And so he is trying to show that him being there is very important for the Israeli cause or the Israeli dream, but he is violating the law here, especially because the opposition forces don't want this at all, and they are demonstrating. And actually, Lapid has talked, the occupation, the leader of the occupation forces, he talked about not accepting Netanyahu's presence or getting a pardon, and that if he wants this pardon, he needs to plead guilty and to show remorse and to also resign politically. And so these are the main conditions in Israel internally, so that they can consider pardoning him. But what he's talking about is an attempt to save face and to protect his extremist government, and not to have the government actually fail, because especially with the elections
Mr. Azzedine, can you tell me maybe how might the standoff between Netanyahu and the opposition figures like maybe Yair Lapid shape Israel's political landscape, particularly regarding the rule of law and electoral dynamics?
Yeah, the first opposer here is Lapid, and this is because of his military operations, or in his role in foreign affairs. And he's always talking about peace, and at the same time he isn't giving up and so he is the perfect candidate here to oppose Netanyahu, especially after being attacked internally and even internationally, and the international condemnations when it comes to having or carrying out genocide in the Gaza Strip, and that it is over for him now internationally, especially that there are calls to arrest him when he visits New York, and this means that the Israeli occupation could actually gather their forces in the negotiations to throw him off his political rule. But this means that he is holding tight to being prime minister, even if this means violating the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement, or even causing Israel more losses and more dollars, millions of dollars actually. According to some of the experts, they've seen this. They had economic losses and trade losses, that they're being boycotted, and so here Netanyahu isn't wanted in the next phase, basically. And as for the far-right extremist government, they are actually supporting him and having his back until the very last minute, until he is announced guilty or until he loses the elections, and then the extremist government will have the new prime minister.
And from Cairo, that was Al Ahram managing editor, Mr. Mohammed Azzeddin. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us here on Q News. And now we go back to Mona Mselhi in our studio. Mona.
Thank you so much, Salma, for the analysis. And back to our bulletin. Egypt has sent its 83rd Zad al-Izza from Egypt to Gaza convoy to the Gaza Strip. The Egyptian Red Crescent said the convoy carries around 10,500 tons of urgent assistance, including more than 5,500 tons of food, baskets and flour, over 2,800 tons of essential medical and relief items, and more than 1,270 tons of petroleum products. For more than 760 consecutive days, Egypt has not stopped the flow of aid, serving as Gaza's main lifeline. Egyptian authorities successfully secured the release of 3 Egyptian nationals who were kidnapped in Mali in coordination with the Malian government and Egypt's embassy in Bamako. The Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs said it closely monitored the case around the clock and continued to provide support and protection for citizens abroad. The ministry urged Egyptians in Mali to follow local laws, carry identifications at all times, exercise caution, and avoid travel outside the capital for their safety.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين. وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
Israeli military officials have expressed growing fears that personnel from the UN interim force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, could leak sensitive intelligence to Hezbollah amid rising tensions on the northern front. A senior Israeli officer told Army Radio that UNIFIL has become more of a destabilizing force than a deterrent and does not aid in disarming Hezbollah. The official added that UNIFIL's presence in southern Lebanon hinders Israeli operations and raises concerns that information about the troop movement could be passed to Hezbollah. Israel's military reportedly prefers UNIFIL to leave the area as soon as possible, citing the force's diminished effectiveness on the ground. The Kremlin has announced that it has received the key parameters of the plan agreed with Ukraine in Geneva, with discussions scheduled for next week. The statement said that differences over international recognition of Ukraine settlement decisions will be addressed during negotiations. The Kremlin also noted rising political uncertainty in Ukraine following a corruption scandal and the resignation of the head of President Vladimir Zelensky's office, citing concerns over Zelensky's legitimacy and reluctance to hold elections or fully adhere to the constitution. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said work continues following large-scale Russian missile and drone attacks on the country's energy infrastructure. During the assault, Ukrainian forces shot down nearly 560 drones and 19 missiles. Zelensky stressed that strengthening air defenses remains Kiev's #1 priority. Russia and Ukraine exchanged claims of major strikes on each other's energy and industrial infrastructure, marking another escalation in their ongoing conflict. Moscow said it carried out large-scale strikes on Ukrainian military, industrial and energy sites, claiming its defenses intercepted 2 Neptune missiles and 158 drones. Ukraine said its drones hit an oil refinery in Krasnodar and an aircraft repair plant in Taganrog, while President Vladimir Zelensky reported Russia launched 36 missiles and more than 600 drones at Ukraine energy targets overnight. In the Black Sea, Turkey said the empty tanker Virat was hit by unmanned surface vessels on Saturday following attacks a day earlier on Virat and another Russia-bound tanker, Kairos. A drone strike on a residential house in western Donetsk has wounded 2 people. Officials said a man and a woman were injured, though their conditions were not disclosed. Donetsk and surrounding areas have faced frequent shelling since 2014, resulting in numerous civilian casualties, with both Russia and Ukraine accusing each other of targeting civilian infrastructure. Venezuela has denounced U.S. President Donald Trump's warning that the airspace above and around the country should be considered closed, calling it an extravagant, illegal and unjustified aggression. Caracas rejected Washington's attempt to exert extraterritorial control, saying the move threatens national sovereignty and violates international law, including the UN Charter and the 1944 Chicago Convention. Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez described it as an arbitrary act that could endanger peace and stability in Latin America and the Caribbean. Venezuela emphasized it would defend its airspace with legality and dignity and called on the international community to condemn the U.S. action. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin. For more stories and live updates, follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Qnews EGY. From all of us, many thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more news and analysis on Qnews.